This episode is brought to you by Progressive, where drivers who save by switching save nearly $750 on average. Quote now at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates, national average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, May 1867, the jailing and release of Jefferson Davis. On this day, the former president of the Confederate States of America posted a $100,000 bail and leaves prison in Richmond, Virginia. He'd been there for 2 years awaiting a trial for treason, and now the case was moving forward with a grand jury. The trial was set to take place in the very courthouse that Davis had used as headquarters of the Confederacy. But Davis would never go on trial, would never set foot back into that courtroom after posting bail and walking out of the building. The case would be mired by delays and missteps by the prosecution, and then, in due time, President Johnson would grant amnesty to all former Confederates, and Jefferson Davis was free to go about his business. So let's talk about the U.S. versus Jefferson Davis, the big post-Civil War trial that never was. Here, as always, Nicole Hammer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there. Jody, I feel like I need to start this with
Yep.
Yeah?
No justice. Like, there's no justice.
Yeah.
Shaking my head so badly. Like,
I will tell you, my first reaction is surprised that there was even a moment where Jefferson Davis was sitting in a jail cell to begin with. I mean, I don't think I even really understood that. So before we get to the part where justice is delayed and then completely abandoned, why don't we talk about why Jefferson Davis sits in jail for 2 years awaiting a trial, why there is a trial for treason? I mean, what goes down? How is it that he gets to even that point?
So it's a kind of circuitous path for Jeff Davis. Obviously, he led an insurrection against the United States government, and you would think that would land him in jail. But what actually lands him in jail is that he is suspected of being part of the conspiracy to assassinate Abraham Lincoln. And he's fingered by somebody who eventually gets charged with perjury. And so they have him in jail. They pick him up just shortly after, I think, the war comes to an end. He's trying to sneak away wrapped in his wife's shawl. But they pick him up for this suspected role in Lincoln's assassination. When they realize that didn't happen, they're like, well, we have him in jail anyway. It kind of seems like he committed some other crimes. So let's try him for treason.
yeah, it was first murder and then treason. And it's like, well, we'll try the treason. I mean, the treason to me is, it just is sort of mind-boggling to me, the way that this whole case is sort of like kicked and fumbled and leads to his eventual just like freedom and pretty much sort of goes off to like right off into the sunset. I mean, it is not at all what I think people in the North anticipated. There were people that wanted Jefferson Davis shot and none of that happens.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny that, I think the overall this story is it exists at these two levels, which is like, one, there's this much bigger question about what is justice, what is reconciliation, how does a country move forward? And then there's this like much more prosaic thing going on the ground of like mounting a case and coming up with evidence. And like, as you said, prosecutors who kind of don't have their act together and are fumbling for charges. I mean, it feels so resonant to right now where, the wheels of justice have to turn in the way they turn. But that is really the heart of this story. I mean, obviously we'll get to that sort of larger question, but the heart of this story really seems to be one of kind of people being unable to mount a sort of airtight case against him, starting with this very idea that like, well, let's move the goalposts. If we don't think he's involved with the assassination of Lincoln, then maybe we can find some other charge.
I feel like this is the perfect case of law getting in the way of justice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you see that in all of the different kinds of debates they have to have in order to put Jefferson Davis on trial. So the first one is, do we try him in a military court or do we try him in a civilian court? And they ultimately decide on a civilian court. And then it's like, where will we try him? Because the place where he would be tried is Richmond, Virginia. And guess what? A jury of his peers probably isn't ideal for coming to a just conclusion. Although it should be said that at least on the grand jury, 6 of the grand jurors were Black. There were a lot of people who felt a lot of ways about that. But there was some representation from folks who were becoming enfranchised or being brought into the legal system. But then it's a question of, like, what is he charged with? Like, can we charge him with treason? Because what does that mean? Did he actually secede from the United States? In which case it can't be treason because he wasn't part of the country. And it, like, gets into, like, all of these different just like legal weeds where if they argue one thing, then it undermines something else. There's this whole thing about folks being punished by the 14th Amendment. And so if they're punished by the 14th Amendment, is the case double jeopardy? And none of that actually gets to the substantive issue of Jefferson Davis being proclaimed the president of the Confederacy and leading an insurrection against the United States.
Yeah. And I think I can imagine Jefferson Davis is probably sitting in his cell with his arms crossed, like, I'll wait. You know, like just waiting for them to sort of
delay.
Exactly. Because all of the sort of twists and turns to try to get something to stick. And I mean, you at this point, like after Lincoln is assassinated, you have Andrew Johnson, who's in the White House now, who's very sympathetic to former Confederates and is pretty much pardoning people left and right. I mean, it does not look good for anyone who wants someone like Jefferson Davis, especially Jefferson Davis, to sort of face up to his actions. And it's a real low point, I would say, in the Reconstruction moment because there is no justice. It sends the message that you can sort of rise up, form your own country, fight against the United States, and then if you lose, well, you just go home.
I want to ask about how this fits into that larger project of Reconstruction, but just a couple more twists and turns of the trial. And then, let's get to these bigger questions. But I mean, they're sort of trying to find a path forward. One of the sort of most interesting tidbits is that at one point it's floated that one of Jefferson's defenses might be that he had actually renounced his United States citizenship when the South seceded. And so you can't commit treason against the country to which you are not a citizen. Very good lawyers there on behalf of Jefferson Davis.
I need these lawyers.
Right. Well, and among the lawyerly strategies, too, I mean, somebody mentioned delay. That was part of the idea, idea that, like, passions would cool over time. And within a couple of years, they're not wrong, at least about the passions of some white Americans who wanted revenge in 1865, but cared a little less in 1867.
So on that question, because to me, right, we've talked about the post-Civil War era so much on this show and talked about Reconstruction, the promise of Reconstruction getting undermined. But I think that this question and this language of treason and revenge and, retribution for an act of treason and traitors, right? I think shows us that in the immediate aftermath of the war, people really were seeing it in those terms, that this was an act of treason. And that word was being used in that time, right? That's not some sort of modern gloss on the battle lines.
It's a formal charge, right? And it's a charge that's outlined in the Constitution as something that people can be charged with, put to death for. In this case, Congress votes to charge Jefferson Davis with treason. So there's an entire political infrastructure and constitutional infrastructure behind this case, which is another reason why it's like there was so much will in 1865 to make this happen, and that will falls apart in a very short amount of time. And I wonder if that's like a good segue, Kellie, to Reconstruction, because I feel like the story of Reconstruction is that it really starts getting underway in 1867 as the prosecution of Davis is beginning to fall apart. How do you see these two stories fitting together?
I feel like there's sort of two layers to Reconstruction. On one hand, you have like these progressive changes that are made on behalf of African Americans. You have African Americans becoming elected officials. You have schools being started and all of this idea of 40 acres and a mule. And then on the other hand, politically, you have like these former Confederate soldiers that are also trying to take up office and also trying to take back power and also trying to insert themselves in places where they can sort of reconfigure their power and authority that they had before the Civil War started. So you have someone like Alexander Stephens, who was the former vice president of the Confederacy, who then wins office, gets elected to serve in the Senate. And it's like, wait, what? How?
You're like, well, you can't do that. You really can't do that.
Now, he was never seated, but that's not the point. The point is that how is it possible for someone like that to serve as vice president of the Confederacy, no less, and then go and serve in the United States Senate alongside African Americans who would have been fighting against him? And white Americans who would have been fighting against him. So, I mean, part of the push and tug of Reconstruction is about these political battles.
Yeah. I was surprised to read this $100,000 bail that Davis puts up and that he then leaves the courtroom and never returns again. A decent amount of that money was put up by Northern abolitionists. I assume these are people who, were not on Davis's side during the war, but I gather that there's a swath of people in the North who think the way to move forward is through a heavy-handed Reconstruction, but not through these kinds of criminal prosecutions. Do you see that as a major force? I mean, why is it that abolitionists are helping?
These were not the abolitionists I studied.
Yeah.
And maybe that's, I mean, there's definitely different sentiments throughout the abolitionist movement for sure. But there were abolitionists that wanted structural change. So it was not so much about the individual, but it was about how do we bring about change throughout the entire system. And with that, I absolutely understand that. I also think that there were other abolitionists, like people like Charles Sumner, that was like, listen, he should have been shot the moment he was captured. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, Charles Sumner being the same senator from Massachusetts who was beaten almost to death in his Senate chamber in 1854, for his sentiments against the institution of slavery, is basically saying, no, he should have been shot.
Interested in the forces shaping our world? The Council on Foreign Relations has you covered. For those who like to look ahead, dive into The World Next Week, hosted by Bob McMahon and Carla Ann Robbins.
We were not forecasting anything about Russian domestic upheaval, and yet that has been the story of the week.
These are scorpions going after each other in a bottle.
And for those who want to go beyond the headlines, join Jim Lindsay as he opens up the president's inbox.
What should U.S. policy do?
The approach towards China, it's enough to make me question bipartisanship.
And finally, join me, Gabrielle Sierra, on Why It Matters, as my guests and I bring some of the world's most compelling stories home to you.
Do you feel good about where we're heading with AI?
Maybe we need to invent a new word here, which kind of is a combination of frightened and excited. I'm excited.
So what are you waiting for?
For the world next week, the president's inbox.
And Why It Matters. We'll see you soon.
There's also, we haven't really talked about this, but there's also a real fear among Northerners that he's going to be found not guilty by this Richmond jury. And that is going to undermine the cause of Reconstruction in some pretty profound ways. And so, if we're thinking about this in terms of justice and Jefferson Davis, it's one thing. If we're thinking about jury nullification and what it looks like if he's found not guilty, because that also means if he's not guilty of treason, then he is not disenfranchised under the 14th Amendment and therefore could run for office again. And so they're also sort of weighing against the worst possible outcome, which is savvy.
Yeah. But it's also sad that all of this sort of maneuvering and negotiation has to take place because there's no sort of clear-cut path to get there.
Yeah. So this, for lack of a better phrase, it just sort of peters out, right? I mean, it sort of lingers for a couple years after this moment when he posts bail. But, there's delay tactics. There's attempts to find new paths of prosecution. There's a couple motions. But he never finds himself in courtroom. He never faces this charge of treason. And then, of course, we get to this moment in 1869 where they formally dismiss the charges against Davis. This is in the wake of Johnson issuing amnesty to all people who participated in the Confederate Rebellion. Davis, he lives for 20-some years longer. At the age of 81, he dies. One other little tidbit, and we'll send this out, but there is this remarkable artifact from this trial. It's a photo of all the people who would have served on the grand jury. And as we said, it's a racially diverse group. And I think that remains, and I think that would have been one of the big sort of hallmarks of this trial. It was the first time that there was Black Americans sat on a trial like this, which we've, I think, name-checked on the show before. So my final question, I think this kind of, we've been circling around this, but I just want to, it feels like the story of Reconstruction is not just the story of a failure to move forward, but the progress and then the step back is the thing that feels particularly, and this feels so in line with that he sat in a jail for 2 years and then he walked out. And is that even worse, or is that even more tragic than had he never showed up at the jail to begin with? And, I just wonder kind of how we should think of Reconstruction in those light of like, we were given a sense of what this path would look like, and then it was rolled back.
To my mind, it signals the incompleteness of Reconstruction, because this is very much a both and situation. Both the country needs to be reconstructed in terms of who can be a citizen, who has sort of full inclusion in the United States, what the structures of the U.S. government look like, but also people needed to be held responsible for their crimes and their actions. And let's just put a big spotlight on it. A former president being put on trial for insurrection and walking away scot-free because of all of these legal and jurisdictional problems. It has some resonance, which makes Reconstruction a particularly interesting thing to study at the moment.
I can't get over how much the resonance for me, the feeling of damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of, it's just, there are no winners here. Not really. Certainly not among formerly enslaved people. And I think the country as a whole loses. I mean, the Civil War was the most violent, one of the most deadliest wars we have ever faced in this country. And the fact that we have not really gotten at the heart of dealing with responsibility and culpability, I think speaks volumes about where we are today.
If you don't deal with it at the time, you're still going to be dealing with it 150 years later, which is a good reason to get it right in the moment.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will leave that story there. Let's do a couple also on this day. These are other things that happened on this day, May 12th, throughout American history. So in 1870, during the Revolutionary War, this is when Charleston, South Carolina surrenders to British forces on this day.
And it was on this day in 1932 that the body of Charles Lindbergh Jr., the 20-month-old kidnapped son of Charles and Ann Lindbergh, was found in a wooded area near Hopewell, New Jersey.
And in 1986, the military action drama film Top Gun, starring Tom Cruise and Kellie McGillis, was released by Paramount Pictures and would premiere in New York.
Does Top Gun hold up?
Yeah. I mean, I even love the remake. It was so good.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm not mad at any of that.
I think an episode on Top Gun as a political force. I mean, Jamel Bowie has a whole series on this, but I was so surprised. Like when you watch Top Gun now, you look back, you're like, oh, I get it. It's such an artifact of the 80s and sort of American militarism. And I get it. I was stunned by how much the new one basically did that same thing. I was like, I didn't realize they made movies like this anymore, where you could just pretend it's the 80s and jet planes are cool and America is the best.
And Tom Cruise on a motorcycle is like,
I was just like, they did not update this. They did not take into consideration any of the sort of world history that's happened over the last 20 years in America. They were like, nope, it's still 1986 and America is badass and we're going to put on sunglasses and bring freedom to the rest of the world.
They threw in a woman pilot and they were like, all right, updated.
Yeah, exactly. Well, anyway, we will leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to This Day in Esoteric Political History. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. Our transcripts, which you can find on our website, are done by Kala Nakua. This Day is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, creator-owned, listener-supported podcasts. Audrey Martovich is executive producer. Yuri Lasordo is director of operations. If you want to support the show, tell a friend about This Day and become a member of Radiotopia at whatever level works for you. You can do that at our website, thisdaypod.com. Also on our site, you can find transcripts, sign up for our newsletter, find links to follow us on Instagram and Threads, buy merch like shirts and hats and phone cases, find information about our theme song, give feedback on an episode we've done, or suggest topics for a future episode. That and lots more, thisdaypod.com. My name is Jody Avergan. We'll see you soon.
Radiotopia from